Between the recording and release of this episode, we learned of the passing of Anthony Head, who portrayed Rupert in Ted Lasso. May he rest in peace, and we thank him for the stories that he helped tell. Welcome to the Binge-Worthy Writing Podcast,
where we take a look at some of your favorite stories and we discuss what tricks, tips, and techniques make them bingeable.
I'm Jonathan. I'm a published short story author and screenwriter who really enjoys writing TV pilots, several of which have been under consideration by production companies, and I love telling stories.
And I'm Jackie. I'm a story consultant and sensitivity reader for Jonathan's scripts as well as for other writers, and I love talking about stories and how they can help create inclusive spaces for others.
And on this podcast, we discuss episodes from what many people consider to be some of the greatest TV shows of all time.
We're committed to amplifying more than just the same traditional voices, so we'll be looking at a variety of TV shows, some of which you know and love,
and others you might not, but should consider checking out.
Since this is our first season, we thought that we should dedicate this entire season to discussing pilot episodes.
The first episode that sells a TV series and makes the audience want to watch more.
Each of our podcast episodes this season will cover a different element that a TV pilot could use to become a successful bingeable story.
Now that you know what makes us binge-worthy, let's talk about what makes a pilot binge-worthy. And one tool that writers can use to make a story irresistible is through a complex exploration of a theme.
If plot is what happens in a TV show, then theme is why it happens. Theme is an exploration of a dramatic question, often one that addresses some of life's biggest questions. What is the price of power? Can love overcome impossible odds? And other questions that will engage your audience long after the show ends.
And one technique to explore theme is by having different characters embodying the different answers to the dramatic question.
And to do this, we'll be looking at select scenes from Ted Lasso.
As many of you know, Ted Lasso is a sports dramedy that ran for 3 seasons, with a 4th premiering later this year. It originally started as a comedy sketch for NBC sports promotional material, and later it was developed into a full series whose first season made Emmy history by being the first comedy to receive 20 nominations.
So what we'll do now is we'll do a dramatic reading of select scenes from the pilot of Ted Lasso,
which we'll be doing through fair use for the purposes of educating our audience.
And every time something stands out to one of us, we'll stop the reading and talk about it.
We'll focus on what makes the storytelling stand out as excellent, but sometimes we might discuss the differences between what's written in the pilot and what got filmed.
And then when we're done, we'll recap our takeaways.
Also, quick disclaimer, even though Jackie and I love Ted Lasso, we still may make some mistakes about the show's lore, but really we're here to give our take on just these select scenes and how they convey the theme.
But before we get into our dramatic reading, we first have to talk about the Thematic Square.
The Thematic Square, at least the version I'm quoting, was popularized by Robert McKee, but it has its roots in philosophy dating all the way back to Aristotle. I've reproduced a simple version of it here in the thumbnail. Ted's pointing to it, actually. Its 4 quadrants represent the 4 views that can be taken on a given topic. We'll be calling each quadrant by the names McKee calls them. Positive, the red square, contradiction, the purple square, contrary, green, and negation of the negation, gray. We'll talk about what each of these means as we see how various characters from Ted Lasso fill out this square and what question they're trying to answer.
Nice. And with that out of the way, let's get right into it.
For the purposes of orienting our audience, let me set the scene. So this is about halfway through the pilot of Ted Lasso, where Ted has just gotten off of a sleepless overnight flight, and he is thrown immediately into a press conference with very little preparation. And this was all due to the machinations of Rebecca, who is the owner of a English football, as Americans might say soccer, league. And Ted just had the worst press conference possible. At one point, he goes for some water. It's seltzer water, and he spits it everywhere. He's kind of publicly humiliated. And so this is kind of the end of that press junket with Rebecca, the owner, addressing the press and her leading Ted off to her office where they talk with Higgins, who is Rebecca's assistant. And so Jackie will be Rebecca. I will be Ted. I will also be Higgins. I'll do my best to copy their accents to the best of my ability.
I cannot do a British accent.
Yeah, so Rebecca is British, but respectfully, Jackie will...
Use your imagination.
Yeah, all right.
Ted Lasso, Episode 101, Pilot. Story by Jason Sudeikis, Bill Lawrence, Joe Kelly, and Brendan Hunt. Teleplay by Jason Sudeikis and Bill Lawrence. Now, you people are going to write the story however you want, but like it or not, AFC Richmond is changing the way we do things, and from now on, it's the Ted Lasso way. We will see you at our next match against Crystal Palace. Thank you. After you, Coach Lasso.
Nice meeting y'all. Sorry for spitting all over your stuff.
Should I do narrator?
Oh, yes, be the narrator, please. Sorry.
Okay. Ted exits with Rebecca, Higgins and Beard behind him. Trent, the team, the pub goers all take to their phones, immediately reacting, complaining, tweeting, texting, etc. Interior training facility, hallway continuous. Ted, shell-shocked, moves down the hallway. Rebecca follows. Ted, don't you think of them for another second. You have a job to do, and proving them wrong has just been added to the list.
Thank you. You know, I'd love to say hi to the team if I can.
Splendid idea. You can't keep a gaffer from his pitch. Ted and Beard head off.
Ain't that the truth? I'm 0 for 2 in that sense.
Ted and Beard are gone. Higgins turns to Rebecca.
Let's just stop there and just go over one part of the thematic square. So in order to understand the thematic square, we have to understand what the square is built around. And between the pilot and how the season sort of develops as a whole, you can come to the conclusion that the theme of Ted Lasso is, can kindness and sincerity be used to get what you want out of life? And Ted represents the positive version of this quadrant. So the red box, the one labeled P, we're labeling that positive. Ted believes that if you are kind and sincere to everybody, you end up getting what you want out of life. And you can kind of see that through the interactions that he has with people. He wants to say hi to people. Now, this scene that we're reading is halfway through. He's already been very amicable, very kind to like all the characters that he's met along the way. Even like the water boy, who most people aren't kind to, he's very kind to, wants to learn his name. It shows that he's the living embodiment of the positive version of this theme, even down to the choice for the accent that he uses. He takes sort of middle American, kind of heartland of America type accent, which many Americans often associate with being sincere and genuine. Now, granted, that is a mental shortcut. Just because someone speaks with that accent doesn't mean that that's true automatically. But everything about his character is kind of designed to exude this kindness and genuineness. Okay, so with that in mind, let's keep going with this scene and discover what happens when Ted leaves the room and what is sort of said behind his back.
Ted and Beard are gone. Higgins turns to Rebecca.
Miss Welton, I was a bit skeptical, but after hearing you speaking there, you're right. Coach Lasso is just what we need.
Oh, he's an absolute wanker.
I couldn't agree. Excuse me?
I hope he fails miserably.
But didn't you...
My ex-husband has truly loved only one thing his entire life, this club, and Ted Lasso is going to help me burn it to the ground. She moves to the earlier picture of her ex, Rupert, staring at it as she speaks. I want to torture Rupert. I want him to feel like he's being fucked in the ass with a splintered cricket bat, just going in and out over and over in a constant loop, like a GIF. That's what GIFs do, right? They're endless? Unsure how to respond, Higgins reverts to his lackey ways.
So let's stop there. We're kind of introduced to actually 2 more elements of the thematic square, but let's do it in order. So Rebecca is the contradiction of Ted, where she kind of embodies the opposite version of his belief. Ted believes that being kind and sincere is the best way to get what you want out of life. Rebecca is showing us that she believes that if you are not sincere about being kind, so she's both being unkind and insincere, to select people, to like the people that she works with in particular, like the club in general. That's how she believes she can get what she wants out of life. And so she's the contradiction to Ted. And so this presents a great opportunity for the show to explore those two and how they approach different problems, and to sort of explore, well, who actually has the better point? Is it the person who's kind and genuine, who's moving through all of these episodes of this TV series? Or is it the person who's kind of faking being nice when people who are watching them in their professional environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that also, even if you're kind of following some of these rules, it doesn't have to like be forced, right? Like in how they characterize her, I don't remember if all of this is in the pilot. You can see where she's coming from. Like from her perspective, she was kind and genuine to her ex-husband, and she feels like she got screwed over, and like that didn't amount to anything, and like she lost basically by playing by those rules. And so
Sure.
Yeah, and so like to get back at the person that doesn't play by those rules, she needs to play by different rules, right? Which is being unkind, like being manipulative, and kind of being nice but not being kind, right? Because it's not coming from a genuine place for like the betterment, or like the well, I guess like to help others, or like to be kind to others. So I think it is something that still makes sense even though they're opposed.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely makes sense. Earlier in the pilot, we saw that she was going through a messy divorce because Rupert basically serially cheated on her. So they portray her as being very sympathetic in her motives, but a little bit unsympathetic in how she decides to act upon those motives.
Sure. Like she's hurting other people to hurt Rupert.
For sure. But also, let's talk about Rupert for a minute, because he represents the fourth square. So this is one of the hardest parts to kind of understand about the thematic square. It's what McKee calls the negation of the negation, which means it basically is, if the positive is just like the vanilla version of what you want the theme to be, and the contradiction is kind of like the opposite. The negation of the negation is a character that embodies a complete and total absence of the positive. So a situation where the positive could never possibly exist. So if you were writing a screenplay about justice, for instance, the positive might be justice, then the contradiction might be injustice, but the negation of the negation would be tyranny, because it's a system under which justice cannot possibly be present. And so if Ted represents being kind and genuine to everyone to, get the best out of life, and Rebecca represents being insincerely kind to get the best of what you want out of life, what Rupert represents is complete and total self-absorption. It's a situation where it's impossible for him to be kind under any circumstances. It's impossible for him to be genuine under any circumstances, except for perhaps being genuinely mean. But, I think I digress a little bit
not
there.
Not for the good of anyone, yeah.
Yeah. And Rebecca pretty much even tells us that's what Rupert's character represents, because she straight up says, "My ex-husband has truly loved only one thing in his entire life, this club." And so that pretty much states his character, that like he is incapable of love. And so that pretty much squarely puts him in our gray negation of the negation box.
Should I pick up?
Pick it up from like a GIF.
Like a GIF. That's what GIFs do, right? They're endless. Unsure how to respond, Higgins reverts to his lackey ways.
You are correct, Miss Welton, though some people pronounce it GIF.
Thank you, Higgins. She walks off, leaving Higgins alone. He makes a weird noise.
And we'll cut there. And so within the selected scenes that we have, I sort of put Higgins in this fourth sort of box, which is the contrary, where it's neither an agreement with Ted, nor is it total agreement with Rebecca either. He's somewhere a little bit in his own fourth square. And the script kind of calls attention to it when they say his lackey ways. So that's in the script. It's not actually in the dialogue. I mean, granted, the actor conveyed the fact that he was acting like a lackey very well. And so someone who is a lackey, they kind of believe what they need to believe. But that kind of doesn't necessarily have to factor into kindness and sincerity. So in order to kind of prove that I believe that Higgins belongs in this fourth box, I want to read another scene that happens later in the pilot. So this is almost at the end of the pilot. They're all talking in the parking lot.
Exterior training facility parking lot later. Ted and Beard exit with luggage. Nathan is with them. Rebecca stands by her chauffeured car mid-conversation with a distracted Higgins. She turns to Ted and with a smile, "Ted, already burning the midnight oil, I see."
Well, as the man once said, harder you work, luckier you get.
They start loading their stuff in Nathan's Mini. "My apologies, Ted. We should have ordered him a car."
No, that's okay. Nate's going to drop us off at the Tube. Get a little more local flavor? Not y'all.
Higgins makes an awkward noise, trying to stifle acid reflux.
I would kind of want to stop there and just say that, this kind of reinforces the themes that we saw earlier, where Ted is kind of being put upon like he's worked all day despite being really low on sleep, and he's still being very affable, very amiable. Rebecca really should have called him a car, but he's okay about it. He takes it in the best way he can. He's very kind, very genuine. And Rebecca makes this big show of being, insincerely kind, that, oh, we should have thought of this. And so you can see that the seeds that were planted earlier in the script, they're coming up. The thing about this thematic square is that it gives your characters fuel for how to approach different scenarios and different philosophies for how to approach different scenarios. So here we have Ted not being able to get a ride home. And so how will Ted react in that scenario? He'll be kind and genuine about it. How will Rebecca react to that scenario? Well, she will have engineered it because she's not being sincere.
Sure.
She's trying to kind of make his life miserable as a means of getting back at Rupert. Rupert isn't part of this scenario, so we can't really comment on that. But this thematic square isn't about necessarily how you build one scene, it's how you build every scene. And this is fuel for how to make your shows bingeable. Because people will want to see how these different characters will approach this dramatic question. Is it really true that nice guys finish last? Or will Ted Lasso actually prove all the schemers wrong, that he's going to, just through the power of kindness and sincerity, be an underdog story?
Yeah.
And a lot of people might dismiss theme. There are some very famous authors and screenwriters out there that say that, you can either forget it entirely or you can, write it in a future revision. And it works for them, so who am I to judge? But as for me, I think it's much more interesting to sort of bake it into the characters, so that way you have fuel for every single scene that these characters are interacting with. You won't know who's going to get the upper hand because you know that they're all on different pages about the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said earlier in the intro, getting this right, I think really does give more power to your story to allow people to reflect, right? It is the power of stories and movies and films and TV shows and all these things, right? Of being able to reflect the human experience back to the person that's watching, and if they're engaged, obviously, and if they're catching on. Where the way you said it was perfect, right? Rebecca is trying to make Ted's life miserable to get back at someone else that's not aware, not truly affected in the moment by that. She hopes it affects him at some point, and I mean we kind of follow that. But I can imagine as a viewer, these are the things, like you said, that allow you to reflect or allow you to, without knowing it, compare a lot of those different squares that we're talking about, right? So it is something that I think naturally people can latch on to, and like you said, it makes this show more bingeable because it, now I'm attached to it personally. I might be reflecting on situations, where I've interacted with people like this, or I've felt like I've wanted to be, person A, but I would like to think that I'm person B or something, so I think I think it really does give a lot of power to the story to really interact with the viewer and hopefully get them to question and reflect.
Yeah, 100%. Stories are a very powerful thing, and I think a lot of that does come down to theme. So let's see how Higgins reacts in this next scene. So I'll pick up from Ted's line. Nate's going to drop us off at the tube and get a little more local flavor. Not y'all.
Higgins makes an awkward noise, trying to stifle acid reflux. What is wrong with you?
It's just everything I've eaten this afternoon feels like it's stuck right here.
Points to throat.
He seems like such a nice man. I don't know if I can do this.
Higgins looks over at Ted, who crams himself into the tiny car. Higgins loudly tries to clear his throat. He can't. Obviously, for this to work, I'll need the support of my new director of football operations. I'm assuming that a promotion and substantial pay raise would be of interest to you? We hear a car horn. Ted pretends to honk a horn as Nathan actually honks, giddy to finally be in on a joke.
This thing's got an invisible steering wheel. Just kidding. It's my man Nate here hitting the horn.
You are a godsend, Ted Lasso. Ted, Nathan, and Beard drive off as Rebecca gets in her car. She rolls down her window. Well?
I accept.
Wonderful. And Higgins, I know there will be aspects to this little adventure that may weigh on you a bit, but I can't imagine it'll be harder than it was to sneak Rupert's women in and out behind my back all those years. She rolls up her window and drives off. Higgins alone makes the noise again and walks toward his shitty car.
And now we find that Higgins is technically in that fourth square, which is contrary. So Higgins, he says, at the very least, and I mean even his body says, through all of the acid reflux, he seems like such a nice man. I don't know if I can do this. So on some level, Higgins does believe in being kind to others. However, he is also a lackey. And so he kind of embodies some of what Ted believes because he does believe in being kind toward kind people, but he also embodies some of what Rebecca believes because he is a lackey. So he doesn't fit neatly into either of those, so he is contrary. It's not the positive, it's not the contradiction, and it can't be the negation of the negation because he does agree with Ted on the aspect of being kind. But what Higgins sort of believes is that he believes in being kind and sincere to people who can reward you back is the best way of getting what you want out of life. He believes in being a lackey. He wants to be kind as he's a lackey, so that gives him something in common with Ted. But because he's Rebecca's lackey, it gives him something in common with her. So he's kind of this interesting character where we don't know how he's going to be swayed because he sees both sides of these arguments. Like he disagrees with Rebecca about being unkind, but Ted can't materially reward him, so he has to disagree with him to keep his job. And so he is a contrary figure. And that's more fuel that this series milks as it goes on. And you're never really sure how Higgins is going to react. And we've filled out a nice, neat thematic square for this part of like the administrative part of this show, but we haven't even talked about any of the players or the coaching staff or the water boy or any of that. So this show has a lot of complexity just on the administrative level, but we haven't even talked about the sports aspect of this, which is the main part. And so that is what kind of fuels a lot of these episodes of Ted Lasso, that you don't really know who's going to get the upper hand in terms of the theme. Like, does it pay off to be nice to everyone? Does it pay off to be nice but be a lackey to someone? Does it pay off to have these schemes running in the background where you're not being nice but strategically, or are you going to be like Rupert, who is completely self-absorbed, and that's the best way to get what you want out of life according to him. So this show is a complex exploration of that, and I have to think that that is why it was so critically acclaimed, because not only was it exploring these very important themes, but it also did it through character. And that's just my hot take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it does set up so much of what you can do with the story, right? Like there's tension between all these different points of views, right? It is a source of conflict. Even, someone like Higgins is conflicted in and of themselves, right? So like you said, it allows him to be able to kind of figure out moment by moment like how he wants to respond, because he has like all those, he's conflicted by all these, the different options that he has to respond. And also, like, again, it's this complexity is much more reflective of everyday life and the actual human experience than idealized versions or versions that are just like meant to be entertaining, which, not to knock on them, it's just they're doing something different, right? So like for this, like Higgins is very relatable, right? Where like we have certain ideals, but sometimes in certain situations they're not very practical. Like he's shown to have, I don't remember if it's in the first episode that we see, but he's shown to like have a really big family, and he really loves his family, and I believe it's like like a one income household, and they have at least like 3 teen boys or something, maybe even more. So you can see where like he's coming from as well, where, he's complicated, and that's a lot more relatable, I think, as a person than, just being like one note, which even Ted, who on the surface could seem one note, like he also like has a complex background story.
Yeah. Yeah. We're only exploring the characters as they relate to the dramatic theme, but that doesn't mean that these characters are limited to that. Sure. I think what makes it interesting is that these characters embody this theme within their workplace, but they're allowed to, at least both Higgins and Rebecca are allowed to act differently outside of their workplace because their scheming is just limited to their work. Whereas Ted and Rupert are a little bit more limited in the sense that Ted really does believe it's best to be kind and genuine to everybody, or at least most everybody. And Rupert is pretty much one note in that, he could put on some charisma or smarm for the purposes of like schmoozing with somebody, but he really is self-absorbed all the time. And that's really how he acts pretty much all the time. Like
it's still to manipulate and get what he needs. But yeah, for sure. I think it interacts like all together. I mean, that's a well-written story, right? All these things are interacting.
Yeah. So this is usually the part of the show where we would do takeaways. The takeaway really is the thematic square. So I'll just sum it up again really briefly. You've got on the screen there, we've got our positive square in the red. We've got our contradiction in purple. We've got our contrary in green, and we've got the negation of the negation in gray. And all of these are kind of at odds with each other in all sorts of ways. And having a character embody each of those 4 corners of the square will add a lot of fuel to scenes and make them more dramatic. And you have to just make sure that the square is built around the same theme. But there are 4 different takes on the same theme. So the positive would be, in the terms of Ted Lasso, being kind and sincere to everybody is how to get what you want. The contradiction is being unkind and insincere to certain people gets you what you want. Contrary would be being kind and sincere, but only to certain people that can reward you, get you what you want. And then Rupert, the negation of the negation, is complete self-absorption, where he's incapable of being kind and sincere. So there are lots of ways you can tweak that depending on what your theme is. It's a really great way of, if you don't have any characters in mind to write, this is a great way of generating characters that will be designed to conflict with one another. And so that's an important tool to have in your back pocket if you don't know what character that your screenplay is missing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it can help inform all the different parts of the story, right? Like in terms of the decisions a character makes, how you characterize them, the choices they're making, tension, conflict, all those things. Also, I don't know if this helps for remembering the negation of the negation and what that means, because I'm just thinking about it, how I was trying to keep it straight during this conversation was that Higgins refuses to just sign on to one side or the other, which is the easier part, right? Ted being the positive, Rebecca being the contradiction. And then when it comes to Higgins, he refuses to use, to just sign on to one side or the other, because he's kind of playing, based on the situation. So to me, that would be, I guess, a negation of taking sides completely. And then I would...
In this case, yes. Yeah. It doesn't have to be that way.
Okay. And then I guess for Rupert, he's kind of doing the opposite of what Higgins is doing, which is he has chosen and he's rejected both of those initial choices that were offered by the square. So I don't know if that helps with negation of the negation, but I was just thinking if I was trying to remember this, I'd have to come up with something, some kind of mnemonic. So yeah, that's all.
Yeah. And so, yeah, this is definitely something that you can use to help with creating characters that maybe your screenplay needs in order to explore its theme further. And with that said, why don't you take us out?
We hope these discussions can help writers of all walks to help diversify the media landscape even more.
Thank you for tuning in, and take care and stay safe.
Bye.